Now. Okay, good evening. Welcome to the ANC 34G hosted Information Exchange series panel session number 6. Thank you for joining us tonight. This series of panel sessions that began September 22nd, the purpose is to involve the community in the Chevy Chase Small Area planning process. It's still underway. There were several events and sessions and surveys that the Office of Planning, who is leading this effort, put together in the spring. They recently closed their feedback after more than a month on October 22nd for input feedback on the draft vision and goals document for the Chevy Chase Small Area Plan. And during the interim, starting in September, we decided to put together this information exchange series that came about through a resolution back in April for us to do a better job to help out involving the community in learning about certain topics that we're interested in that came up through different meetings and chats and so forth. So that first session started on September 22nd. It was hosted by Commissioner Gosselin, and it was all about just what are small area plans. And the speaker was Jeff Farner, who's from the city of Alexandria in Virginia. The second one was hosted by myself, and it was the topic was perspectives of high-rise residents, and that was really fun. It was 3 apartment residents who they live in 3 separate apartment buildings on Connecticut Avenue, and we got to hear about their perspectives of living here and what they wish to see and the challenges that they face. I hope you do watch this recording, and it'll be in the chat, the links. The third one was creative use of space. How do we leverage underutilized space? How do we support creatives and entrepreneurs? And how do we create economic vibrancy, vitality? And we had Chevy Chase Art, Kathleen Zay-Fang there, as well as the manager of the Chevy Chase Farmers Market, Pallavi Chandra. And that was really nice to talk about pop-up and how to make use of vacant spaces. And then the following session, we had community land trusts, and that was very exciting too, to learn about how we can bring affordable housing here. And the community land trust model is an interesting one, and I encourage you to watch that video and learn more about it. And then we had last week a panel of on nonprofits, nonprofit organizations who develop affordable housing, as well as designers who work with nonprofits, and both were residents here, Susan Slater rather, and Michael Marshall, and that was a very good panel. Got a lot of Q&As and questions answered, and so today, it brings us to today, which is our panel on vibrant public spaces. And this one I'm most interested in after seeing, I hope you guys have seen it, and maybe someone who's here can put the link in. Ward 3 Vision put together a wonderful presentation on what could be possible, 30 years into the future for Chevy Chase DC on the commercial corridor, and opportunity sites for us to see services and buildings that could be made to better use. And that presentation was hosted by the historic Chevy Chase DC on October 6th. And in that presentation, Matt Bell, who's here today, who I'll introduce in one minor second, gave that talk. And there was a piece about the community center, and that is mainly the focus today, I hope, when Ellen and Matt come to speak. And so the title of today's talk is Vibrant Public Spaces, How Can We Create a Great Central Meeting Spot in Chevy Chase, DC? How can the redevelopment of the library and community center into a campus with affordable housing provide such an opportunity? That's the question posed to our 2 speakers, Ellen McCarthy, who's here tonight, and Matt Bell. Ellen lives in our ANC. Matt Bell is adjacent to our ANC, and I am so happy to welcome them today just to speak to us, just to fire our imaginations. This is going to be a conversation. I've asked you all who are attendees to use the chat to chat, but use the Q&A to ask a question. And I think around 7:25, I will start fielding your questions, but between now and then, we'll have each panelist introduce themselves, tell a little something about themselves and share with us, and then we'll go into a short presentation, and then we'll go Q&A, Q&A, Q&A. I expect to close this talk no later than 8:15, okay, this panel session, so it won't be very long. Thank you so much. Ellen, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, something we don't know, because we have seen you, but a little tidbit.
Okay, thanks, Connie. Good evening, everybody. I grew up in Prince George County, next to what is now the West Hyattsville Metro Station, and I am a Terp. I got my undergraduate degree from the University of Maryland, and then a long, long time ago, after that, I got my master's in city planning from Harvard. I've had 40 plus years of experience as a city planner. And for some of that time, I was the planning director under Mayor Williams and for a time under Mayor Gray. And I am a 30 plus year resident of the neighborhood on Morrison Street, just a couple of blocks off, a block and a half off of Connecticut. So tonight, what Matt and I wanted to do is not an exhaustive treatment of public space issues because it's a pretty complicated subject, but just an introduction on how to think about what we want the public space to be like in the area when the library and the community center are redeveloped, hopefully with affordable housing above that. So let me.
Okay, before you go, let Matt introduce himself and tell us a little something about himself.
Okay.
And then we'll go right into that.
I'm Matt Bell. I am an architect. I teach architecture at the University of Maryland. I've been there for longer than I can remember, Ellen's alma mater, but I wasn't there when she was a student. Okay, I just want to make that clear. And I also practice architecture here in Washington with Perkins Eastman, and we're going to show some of our work there. I have a reason for that to explain in a second. I don't specialize in building types. I specialize in what I call public architecture, which is architecture, whether it's residential buildings or libraries and community centers and schools that add to the vitality of the public realm. Because what really I'm interested in is really healthy communities and buildings that contribute to healthy communities, whether they're private buildings or public buildings. And to tell you something that you don't know about me,
yes, what don't we know?
I love what I do and I'm very passionate about it, but sometimes I think I could have been an opera star. So you know.
Okay. So
if you would like to close, if you would like to close with an aria, Matt, that would be okay.
Maybe, I don't know, not tonight, but maybe someday. But you know, big fan of that. It's a very public event too, right?
And Matt, you live just
and
south
I live just by Politics and Prose, down by the firehouse, in a 1928 semi-detached house that's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. It's one of these sort of interesting little builders' houses that very few architects are so clever at designing today. And we've been here in this house since 1996, and love the community and want to do what I can to help make it an even greater community.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you so much. So Ellen, you want to start sharing your slides? Let's hope that the technology
I just want to add
works.
one more thing. Ellen called me up at 10 o'clock this morning to help with this presentation. So
yes.
I just want to point that out. So.
Yes. You are just added and we're so lucky to have you, and it's going to be a fantastic hour. So thank you so much for agreeing. It'll be paid forward, I'm sure.
My pleasure.
Okay, so just a brief introduction, what we should be thinking about in terms of how we're going to get where we want to go in our new, hopefully new civic space. And the most important thing always for designing a good space is determining ahead of time what uses people want to see there. So if you've not had a chance to be thinking about that, hopefully this will start those juices flowing tonight, because there's all kinds of possibilities and options about what we could do when the library and community center are redeveloped. And but the first thing will be figuring out what uses people want to see there and in the buildings around there. And then sometimes we don't want to go into that process with a totally fully cooked design. We can also think about lighter, quicker, cheaper installations first to see if there's something that we are curious about but not sure it's going to work, to find a not permanent installation, but put something there to give us a sense of how it might work. And one of the most important decisions will be knowing ahead of time who is going to manage the space and what resources they will have available to them for managing the space. Because place management really is so important in determining what you can do in a public space. The place manager will program the space, whether it's coming up with, outdoor games or concerts or whatever, but also be in charge of maintaining the space to make sure that it's kept clean and safe, and that there's a sense of oversight of management so people feel safe in the space. The level of management, of course, will dictate offerings. If you don't have somebody that can take movable chairs and tables in at night, then that's not going to be an option. And if you don't have storage space for movable chairs or chess sets or whatever you want to see in your public space, that will also be an option and important to determine. Some other practical considerations: there's always a trade-off when you're doing a civic space. You want enough space for larger events like our wonderful Chevy Chase Day that Robert Gordon and the Citizens Association recently organized, but you want to have the space designed such that it doesn't feel like a vacant eyesore if you don't have an event going on. So flexible seating helps with that. Secondary seating, like good spaces on walls or other places, so that there's places to sit, but it's not obvious that nobody's sitting in there when nobody is sitting in there. And public art, and particularly public art that kids can climb on or do things with, that helps create that sense that there's something going on in that space. Other practical considerations that we'll need to think about when we get into detailed design are making sure there's lots of electrical outlets so that if we have a concert or a community discussion or whatever, that we have places for the sound, that we have good lighting, that there are plants that are well cared for. But then in terms of filling that space or providing opportunities for people to sit and enjoy it, there's a lot of different options. Seating can be very flexible. This is a family in Paris next to the Seine, obviously enjoying comfy seating and some books that were available. Or you can have umbrellas and movable chairs and tables that will fill a space that can then disappear when you need to do something else there. The library area right now is an example of some pretty flexible seating and uses. This was this afternoon when I was going by the library, and a mom and daughter were taking advantage of reading their books. But it's also cool that we have this DC Health drop-off spot, which if you want to get your free COVID test in the library and drop it off there, I just did it and got my results in less than 3 days. It's very impressive. The cool thing about making a plaza work is that you don't have to do a whole lot because people love to watch other people. This is one of my favorite public spaces, which is down at the Georgetown waterfront. And this is a salsa group that meets there regularly on Saturdays. They just come with a boombox with salsa music, and they then give salsa lessons and dance salsa with each other. And these are the people who were in the park for other reasons, who found it interesting to just stand there and watch the folks who were doing the salsa dancing. So there's a lot of entertainment that can be provided at absolutely no cost. And this is one of my favorite examples of an incredibly flexible space that is in the Wharf, which was designed by Matt and his firm. Under normal circumstances, when you go into this space, it's just a space between buildings, and it's empty or has a few plants in there, but it can turn into a concert stage. They put these planters up on to delineate the exterior part, and then put tables and chairs there. But then the planters can move, and it can be configured entirely differently. I can just have some benches or other seating in there for people to sit. So in just one relatively small space, you can have a whole variety of activities. And that's basically my introduction. And let me then go to, I'll call up
This is the generationally technically challenged portion of the program.
Hey,
Yes, but hopefully you can
That wasn't
see,
bad, Ellen. I got to say, that was pretty
we
good.
we
only
practice in the
because Connie
green.
and I rehearsed ahead of time.
Okay. Does it go full screen or not? No, that's okay.
I think that,
That's what we get.
I think that's it. Yes.
Okay, no big deal. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about public buildings, private buildings, and public space, because clearly, you know, in the future is the library and the community center, whatever shape those take, and also potentially, you know, obviously housing. People have talked about that and how they go together that shape public space. And I have a few case studies. And I selected some case studies from our work, partly because I think people will be able to go visit them and maybe see some of these things in action, so to speak. So go to the next slide, please. So a few simple rules, and some of this is redundant with what Ellen said, but embrace what exists. And that may seem obvious, but really you want to make what's already there better. And so Connecticut Avenue is a good street. We want to make it a great street. Embrace the character of it, all the different things around it, and try and understand that. I think is really important. Good public spaces seem like they've always existed in their communities. You want to create facades and landscape elements that define the public space. In other words, you want a kind of sense of a contained place. People feel, you know, like more secure and more places have more value when they have a kind of sense of definition to them. Ellen talked about flexibility. You want to program for and design for richness and flexibility. In other words, lots of different uses for different age groups throughout the year, throughout the week, throughout the day, and flexibility. And this does not depend upon size of space. There are sometimes, as Ellen showed, very small spaces that are really wonderful places to be in. We find actually big spaces are oftentimes harder to make really great than small spaces. I would argue invite views in and experience views out. In other words, the buildings that shape the space really need to engage it in a way that adds to the experience of being there. So lots of times you might just go to a public space to use the space, but other times you may use the building and go in it, and you want to feel that sense of engagement. And good urban design and good architecture has that sense of engagement between the inside of a building and the public spaces that it sits in, whether it's a street or a plaza. And you want to engage the street level. The most important level in any city is the street level. How does that engage the pedestrian? How does that engage views? How does that invite people in? So just a couple of case studies here. I thought we'd start with the wharf. I'm not suggesting that the wharf is that Chevy Chase DC ought to be the same scale as the wharf, because the wharf is clearly something much larger. But the lessons I want to talk about are things that transcend size, but are things that apply to any kind of public space. Now, when you look at, I imagine most folks listening here have been down to the wharf and walked along Wharf Street. But when you stop and think about it, these rules are pretty well enforced. Number one, the buildings, such as the street walls and the sort of landscape accoutrements, define the place, from the steps to the facades of the buildings, to the lamps, to the way the lamps and the paving all begin to give a definition to different zones and a sense of space of Wharf Street. That's really important. There's lots of different uses. There's retail uses, there's restaurants, there are performance venues, there's residential uses, there are hospitality uses, there are office uses. All of these things bring people there different times of the day, different times of the week, different parts of the year to animate the space in different ways. It is something that is, you know, one of the things we're always trying to do with public spaces is get a lot of different uses in a smaller space so that it feels vibrant. It feels like there's always something going on there that people want to be a part of. And then you want an architecture that engages that space. A lot of use of glass, particularly at the ground level, that engages the pedestrians, even if they're not patronizing the business there. And at the wharf, of course, we have the opportunity to put uses at a second level. Restaurant uses, you know, that might be something to consider in Chevy Chase, but that even adds people. And, you know, like Ellen said, you can sit there and just all day long watch people go by or people doing various dance steps in the plaza. Next slide. These are things also that apply at night. You know, and you can see if you've been down there, the different kinds of seating arrangements that different restaurants have. There are different things in the winter. They have fire pits and things that animate this space, events at the Anthem, one could imagine that that might be analogous to the community center and different kinds of events that might go on there. And then even the lights in an apartment building where somebody's home, somebody's living, there's a sense of habitation in a residential building goes a long way to making a space feel safe and welcoming. Next slide. The uses are interesting too. At the Wharf, there's public uses. This is the sort of assembly hall that you can rent out for weddings and other uses, but it also could be used during the day. People just sit there and sit on the steps and hang out. So there are things that are very specific uses, but this is also sitting over top of the dockmaster's house. So there's also quite functional things there at the lower level and then celebratory things above. So you have public space and public use with highly functional things that make the waterfront go along. And those kinds of spaces are really important. Next. And then something for everybody. The Wharf, we've been very careful to design places for kids so that families could be there. There's the pier where the kids have a splash park, different kinds of boat rides and things. So you want to really sort of look at the way in which everybody can be engaged there, and people can go there, even though they might not even think about going there, and they find something that's of interest to them, or even sitting there watching kids get all wet in one of these splash parks is kind of an entertaining thing. So really thinking about something for everybody in the community, whether it's an active or a passive use. Okay, so that's some points about the public space. Buildings are going to be very important to how they engage the public space, both on the inside and on the outside. We designed the Cleveland Park Library, and this picture shows the amount of glass we use to really draw people in. And even though we don't have a big plaza outside, one of the ideas of this building was to make it very transparent to Connecticut Avenue, almost as though it was saying, please come in and check out what we have. Engage the space of Connecticut Avenue in a way that says we're open, we're inviting, we want you to come in, we want you to be a part of this public event on the inside of this building. And it has a scale that defines the public space of the street. Next. So the old library, probably a lot of us remember that, didn't do those sorts of things. Next. And so what we really tried to do was to turn the building inside out so that it really had a much more engaging way of dealing with, the small park on Macomb Street and the small kitty garden on Newark Street, and things that really engage the interior and the exterior of the building. Next, we did save the panda though. We also understand this goes to the idea of the uniqueness of place. We discovered that this building sits between Rock Creek Park and the main street of Cleveland Park. So we wanted to sort of celebrate the views and heighten the experience of people in public space of those two views. Next. So what we did was design the ends of the building to be very open so they engage that public space outside. So people feel a sense of attachment and an invitation in, but also once they're in there, an attachment to the historic fabric of Cleveland Park on the outside. Next. And even to the extent to which we included porches on the buildings to engage that exterior. Like the second levels at the Wharf, these were designed to be porches like the big houses in Cleveland Park so that people can inhabit the outside of the building and animate that space, even if they're just sitting there working on their computer. Next. So you can see the way in which the scale of the building sort of begins to define that public space like the apartment buildings on either side in the lower drawing there. Next. On the interior, the idea was to make the interiors frame views of the outside. So the design of the interiors is a very simple idea to frame those views and suggest that the scenography of Connecticut Avenue was part of the interior of the library itself. Next. And even with the kids' library, the idea that library space extends out into the garden, that garden space on the north side of the building is really part and parcel of the experience of the children's library with our little tree there. And that, by the way, that tree occurred because the structural engineer forgot about a column when we were doing we had to figure out how to cover it up. But it was a happy fortuitous accident, but we turned it into a tree with lanterns, but the idea was to relate the inside and the outside, even with the color of the carpet, extending the green from the outside in. Next. And then the idea being small places have connections to the exterior and public space. Go ahead, keep going. That's the magazine area. And the stair even engages the outside. So you look up and down Connecticut Avenue, you see out, but you can also see up and down the street. And it's really important, like the outside spaces that Ellen talked about to hang out in, it's important that the interior spaces that you hang out in are also very comforting as well, or comfortable as well, so that they engage the exterior. Next. So you get a view from all different levels, looking down, out, seeing the place where you are, because you always want the building to help reinforce your sense of place. You want the building to establish that market and help build familiarity for the community. Next. So then on the inside, the reading room has a view on the left out to Rock Creek Park, between buildings on Macomb Street, and on the right, it frames the views out to the historic district. So whatever we decide to do with the design of these new community assets, they should participate in how we experience that, our community. Next. So here you have a couple of views of that. And then finally, just a couple of slides. Yeah, last two, and then 3 or 4 more slides. The community center we did over in Northeast, and if people are interested in going on tours of either of these buildings, I'd be happy to do that. But this building, go ahead, next slide. The idea of this building was to make a community main street that connected the metro station on the left with the community on the right. And you can see the community main street in the center of the slide here, which is this piece right here. And the community very much wanted a place to see and be seen. But what was also important was the extent to which this building defined the public space. So there are all these sports fields. So we made a building that helped define that space with both the landscape of the trees. So this is the big sports field outside, and the building engages the views from the inside to the outside, but also participates in defining that public space. And it has a smaller sort of plaza in the center of all that. So the architecture works to establish place. So on the right is one of the views coming in. That's a view standing at this end, looking in if you were coming from the metro station there. And you want the entries to the building to engage those spaces and be very welcoming. Next. And then the idea here, the architecture is very transparent. This is the sort of play area outside, almost like the community center's piazza here, that the building, that's the adult. This is the adult activities wing here, and this is what we call the street on the inside. And so you can see the way the architecture begins to define and establish and give boundaries to that space of the exterior space. So it participates in a dialogue between interior and exterior. Next. And then even things like we elevated slightly the plaza so parents can stand up on a little terrace here and watch the kids play. Even being elevated, just a couple of risers there provides for a very good sense of overlook and a sense of place. So understanding different levels in public space and how they can enhance the sort of theatricality of the moment, the theatricality of kids running around the football field is really important in providing places where those kind of activities can be engaged. Next slide. And then this is really the main street of the community center here. And the idea here was all the activities, the pool, the gym, the DC Public Library, and the daycare, and the adult room here all engage with like front doors on this space. So the idea was this was the space where the community wanted to bump into each other. This is a place where they wanted to see their neighbors, but also they wanted to have that connection to the outside so they could see what the kids were up to on the sports field. So the idea here was that the building was an agent in helping provide for engagement and security and a sense of familiarity with the community, while at the same time defining that public space, like I said, with that L shape. Next slide. And then you can see this is the final 2 pictures. This is the adult room on the right side, and on the left side, the library. And the idea was to bring the context of the fabric of the Deanwood community into the library, into the main reading room, so it's highly transparent, and then also to engage the sports fields on the right. So those are just 2 ways that we've tried to sort of use the buildings to engage exterior and public space in a way that adds to the sense of place in the community.
Well, that was really, that fires up the imagination for what is, possible here. And I mean, I definitely feel like the community center, it's hard to know. I mean, if you're there at the library, to turn in, but that it's not a very inviting space, and it's very difficult to for people at the street level to know. I mean, just the way I mean, there's more, I guess there's more questions, but for people to know to go in and to do something. I mean, if you're in the Chevy Chase playground, a lot of parents or their caretakers of little kids, they go and they sit there and that's their little spot. But I don't see a lot of engagement at the center. And I do think that I like what you said, Matt, about where you are in the space. You know, where is everything in relation to each other? And what is it that you want to bring in? And what is it that when you're inside you want to see? And I think that's going to be interesting for us to
You know,
think through those ideas.
the street I mentioned in the Deanwood project was not part of the program. We invented that because the community said we want a simple space where we can bump into each other and see all the different activities that were going on. So it wasn't originally part of the program. And in actual fact, in the Cleveland Park Library, the first space you go into on the right, which has the checkout desk and everything, that was also not part of the program. And we invented that space to be, and we call that the forum. So that's where the meeting rooms and the children's library and the checkout desk and the stair and the elevator all come together. And the idea was that you needed a space that almost had no specific function there. People could see each other and feel like they were part of a kind of more communal experience.
Yes. And I just want to put this in context. The reason we're trying to fire up the imagination is that we did have a budget for the community center a few years back, and the budget wasn't really enough when they started doing the plans, but those plans still exist. And then the library had a budget, and that's when the commission said, why should we should really be thinking about it as a campus, you know, to pull it together. And then there was the idea of trying to bring in affordable housing, you know, to that campus, and how can we do it? So we're there. It's not, these are ideas on the table, and for us to figure that out. And I think that in a lot of the vision and goals in that document, certainly in the visioning workshops that the Office of Planning put together, there are a lot of, if you look at the murals, it's on the publicinput.com/Chevy Chase. If you go to public participation and you'll see the visioning workshops, in the captured notes, you'll see people say they want a civic core. They want a place where they can gather. And it's not just walking from store to store, which is nice. And the benches are great and the white sidewalks are wonderful. But where can we go to kind of just like you buy your lunch and maybe you don't want to sit exactly there, but you kind of want to go somewhere else and be with a friend, or like the beautiful photo you showed today, Ellen, in your slides, having the mother or the caretaker and the child sit there and read, just to have that. Because when we are outside, we do bump into neighbors, and that's what community is, right? You strike up a conversation or you're reading together. To be able to do that in all kinds of weather, you know, to kind of go inside and come outside and to have that kind of vibrancy is important for us to think about and
You know,
to convey.
Commissioner Chang, one thing that told me that the porches that we put on the Cleveland Park Library were a success is when I saw people sitting out there in really hot and really cold weather. And sometimes really good space that people want to be in, they'll go there even if it's not the greatest of weather conditions, because it has a certain quality to it. They'll see people, they enjoy being there, they can people watch, like Ellen said, you know, in a way that is pleasing to them and effortless. And I think those, and to me, really good quality public space is not a question of size, it's a question of design.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you think about one example I always like to point to is when they had the Barnes and Noble in Bethesda, where the little fountain was there. It's been replaced by some other store right now, but just the idea of, I always saw people sitting on that fountain, drinking their Starbucks and eating a cookie and hanging out. There's a little tiny space on all of Bethesda, but it had a lot of nice elements to it, you know. And I think it was a really great lesson in placemaking without making big spaces, you know, and it's one of the challenges, I think.
Yes, and when Ellen was giving her presentation, and you said, being able to be flexible, I immediately thought of like politics and prose. Even before it's a bigger space now, but in that back section, they just kind of move the bookshelves around and then they create that space for the speaker. So there's not like a separate room that people go to. So you're wandering around and then suddenly the space changes, and it works. There have been talks where it goes out the door, but you're still there and you're still a part of it. You could still wander and do what you want to do when you walk in, and suddenly you're there seeing a speaker with everyone else. It's really nice. Um, Anything you want to add about that, Ellen, about your slide and like your presentation and what Matt said about some of the, I mean, I think what I was going to actually ask you is in the former presentation last week, Susan Slater mentioned, it's possible to build affordable housing, but really what matters, what it takes is like an exciting vision. So what will it take really for us to have a pretty exciting vision? Not just like these are the things we need in a center, like this is the things we need in a library, like these are the things that we need. But what is it about, like how do we create a civic core? What do we want to see there? How do we build that exciting vision and get people excited about this vision? How do we do that? Where do we start?
Well, a great process that I was a little bit a part of was the process for the redevelopment of Martin Luther King Jr. Library downtown. And DC Public Library used a software program that both encouraged people to submit, what would you like to see in the downtown? So, or in the downtown library. So there are people who are saying, I love StoryCorps. I think there'd be a great play. It would be great to have an opportunity to do oral histories of the community and capture that. And other people were talking about what teens needed. And then, it wasn't just online because they also had cards available for you to fill out at each of the branch libraries to submit ideas too. But online, then people who were viewing the suggestions that were made could vote them up, could say, oh, I think that's a great idea. So you could see what was emerging as a program concept that really resonated with people. And I hope that we can have a similar process where Department of Public Works, DPR, Department of Parks and Recreation, and the library get together and provide opportunities for the public to say what they want to see in both of those, since presumably they don't each need their own community meeting rooms, for example. There should be the opportunity to get some economies of scale with regard to that. And but it's also important to pick the right architect in terms of getting an exciting design.
Yeah.
So and that's one thing that the DC Public Library has been exemplary about. They've really been dedicated to getting architects that have high quality designs, and not just, the typical DC government building, but they aimed very high, as you can see from Matt's project of Cleveland Park and Deanwood, and the Meccano, the Dutch architects that did the Martin Luther King Library downtown, and David Adjourn, who did the two branch libraries as well. Anyhow, it's important that that's a shared understanding with Department of General Services or whomever ends up being the contracting body for district government that will oversee the design and development of the new projects there.
Yeah, we had a very robust community dialogue project for the Cleveland Park Library.
Okay.
And one of the things we tried to do early on was, a couple of things I think were important. One is the library system is a terrific client. They really want to build quality, and DPR is the same way. They want to build quality facilities. It's really important, I think, to listen carefully first to the community, and then sort things and present them back to make sure that whoever's designing.
I hope we didn't lose Matt.
These facilities to be unique. You want it to be what you would build in Chevy Chase. you wouldn't build in another part of town, and vice versa. So you want these things to be unique. And then what we always do is we always start with precedent images, you know, and instead of rolling out a design early on, I think it's really important to say, you know, like this, is this something that, you know, is important to you all? Or tell us places or buildings or libraries you've been to, why you like them, or public spaces that you've been to, why you like it, why you felt safe there, why you went there on a rainy day, why you went there on a snowy day, why you went there on a sunny day. What did it offer for you? And oftentimes what you get back is very, very thoughtful and important feedback. And I think if and when the time comes for this project, it'll be really important to establish a good dialogue and a lot of listening and a lot of sort of trading ideas back and forth before anyone really rolls that into design.
Yeah, I really like what I like both of these points. I think that if we were able to, I was like visualizing almost like a slideshow, like you say, like, how about this feature? What do you think about this? And like up or down, like, oh, I really like this, or to be able to say, this is the kind of thing I really like. It's precisely this kind of main street where I could hang out and I could see everyone, I could bump into them. That would be a really nice feature, and then someone could vote it up and down as long as they could see that, you know. So we have to think through how we can make that happen. I think that's pretty exciting, and getting community input for the community you live in is really key, right? We're all here and we want to see things, you know, we want to have the ability to interact in a way that makes sense here. You know, we're not other places here in DC, although we're all, you know, living in the district. I'm going to ask you a question from our audience. Matt, it's directed to you. Clearly, the structures you showed us are high quality design and construction. How do you make sure that similar design and construction quality is incorporated in Chevy Chase? And this is by Robert Gordon.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. You know, what the library system and other agencies in the city have been doing in recent years is doing design build teams, which is interesting because what they're looking for is a sort of experience in chemistry to be able to do the job, and I think they're kind of smart about that. Obviously, what Ellen said about having a good designer is very important, but you also need a very good builder, because you need a builder who can say, well, here's your budget, and work through the budget and say, well, we can afford this, and you have to choose between these things, because nobody gets everything they want, right? And there's always a point at which, you know, the client, in this case, the community too, has to be clear about what their priorities are, you know, and about where they want to spend the money, right? So I think one of the ways you get quality, aside from hiring talented and experienced and hardworking people, is to make sure you have a team that knows how to help navigate the ins and outs and ups and downs of budgets and priorities that will reflect well what the community values. So, for example, at Cleveland Park, we had a very different idea about the interior, and we just couldn't afford some of the ideas we had about the interior. So we worked with Gilbane, who was a very good builder, and we came up with a painted brick on the interior, which was very cost effective and a very good aesthetic solution for the interior of the building, and brought the building in, that and some other things, brought the building in on budget. So there is a process whereby I think that can happen. You know, it's not going to happen at the snap of your fingers, but I think there is, if you hire the right people who have good experience with construction budgets and design and work with communities on what their priorities are, I think if that happens, you stand a very good chance of getting what you want and getting the quality you want.
Mm-hmm. You know, I was thinking as we were talking about community input, Randy was very involved in that, and Commissioner Speck, do you want to share some of that so we have some history as we continue to move along here?
Yeah, we went down this road before when we were thinking about doing the community center, and we had a budget for it. It wasn't as much as we thought we needed, but we went out to the community. We did a couple of surveys of what the community wanted. We came up with a very extensive report then, and we got the money. We didn't get as much as we wanted and what we thought we needed, but we started down that path, and the district hired an architect who did a reasonably good job, I thought. And they also, just as you suggested, Matt, they first of all came to us and said, okay, what is it you like about this, or you don't like about that? And, is this something you would be interested in? And then they came up with some very preliminary designs that were exactly the kind of thing we were all imagining, with the interaction with the street particularly. I mean, for instance, they had the ballet studio was on the second floor, lots of glass right out on the street. So as you walk by, you could see the ballet dancers there. It was fantastic. Those were exactly the kinds of things that we wanted. And we had to stop that process because we didn't have enough money to do what we wanted. And we wanted to go back to the council and ask for more money. And then came the pandemic. And so that changed things. And then came the small area plan. And so, and the possibility of working with the library. So all of that's gotten shelved for the moment. But there's been a lot of work done about what people want, what people expect, and what might be possible. And now I think we can imagine a lot of wonderful things in that space. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity to working with a really great architect, really great builder, with the DPR and the library. Now, that's not to say that there aren't going to be huge challenges involved. And particularly when we add in affordable housing into this mix, because that's going to be an important aspect of this. But if we can get all of these components working together, challenging, I'll admit, but something that I think is doable, this could be such a spectacular place. It's got all of the characteristics, I think, that would lend itself to being a wonderful public space that would invite people in and have tremendous interaction with the street. So I'm looking forward to it. And that's what energized me before I even began the small area planning process, is to see the kinds of things that could be in that space that would make it so much better than what we've got right now.
Yeah.
Well, what I like about that program is library, community center, and housing, because I think one of the secrets to vitality of public space is to have a lot of different uses. And I think the idea that the community seems to be embracing to add the housing as part of this project is a really good way to go, and will add an element to the vitality of the place. Will make it quite unique.
And give you activity in the evening and on times when the library and the community center might not be open or active.
Right. I mean, you want to look at uses daily, weekly, and annually, you know. One thing that the city typically does to establish budgets is they do feasibility studies and do cost estimates to put things in the capital budget, you know, and I don't know if they're planning on doing that, but it's one way to sort of establish a budget that could meet the program needs. So it could help you get what you want.
This is Stuart's question, reacting to your response to Robert Gordon's question, is what influence, leverage do community members have to ensure a good team is hired by the city? This has come up in various ways. Like what can we do to ensure that? So I don't know if Matt has the answer, or Ellen, you've done so many projects.
Well, I can tell you what our experience is. The selection committee for the Cleveland Park Library was comprised of DC Public Library facilities professionals and the Friends of Cleveland Park Library and community members. So they had a pretty interest, and some of the community members actually were architects who were very experienced in this sort of thing. And I think when we do schools, when DGS does schools, they also involve parents in the selection process, and they do a pretty thorough vetting of the qualifications to get to a short list to interview. And sometimes it is a design build team, so there is a builder there too, and they have to demonstrate both design qualifications but also construction qualifications, on time, on budget, all that sort of thing. So I think, and there are a lot of good builders and a lot of good architects in this town. And generally the ones who make the short list for those kinds of jobs can all do the job. I think one of the challenges, the implication of this question is the city's bad at working across silos and listening to constituents. Maybe one of the challenges is to make sure that the DC public libraries, the housing folks, and the DPR are all working together and sort of rowing the boat in the same direction. That'll be very important.
Right, that was Stuart's other question. So he had
Yeah.
two. So and he's saying in our experience, the city is very bad at working across silos and listening to constituents. What can you say that might reassure us that that won't be true here too? And I think that that's something where I think the commission has to do some work trying to bring in the different agencies that would be involved in modernizing the library, modernizing the community center. These are different agencies, and then to build affordable housing is also another agency, and that leads us really to the next question, which is.
Let's just say one thing about that, Connie. One thing about
Yeah.
that. We have
Yeah.
done schools that had community centers in them, and DGS and DPR found a way to work together. They may have an internal MOU that they work from and things like
Yes.
that, which might be important to establish in the beginning about how they're going to work together. It certainly is a reasonable question to ask them. I will tell you from the public projects we've done, both for DPR and the public library system, both of those groups are very interested in hearing what the community wants and trying to meet the needs of the community. We just did a feasibility study for Jelliff, and there was a lot of back and forth about the needs of the community there. So I think those two agencies are pretty good at trying to meet the needs of the community. Sorry, I just want to add that.
Yeah, and so this leads me to Peter Range's question. Please tell us about your experiences combining public spaces with affordable housing. And Thomas Laria's question, which is the priority to create public space involving the community center and library, or is the affordable housing component an equal priority? I am not hearing much of the affordable housing priority in this discussion. So,
well,
I don't know, Ellen, would you like to take that?
Well, I think one of the reasons you're not hearing much about affordable housing in this discussion was that the topic is talking about that public space and the functions that the public space ought to fill. Obviously, I think we could easily do another session or two on affordable housing and how to make sure that it's designed well, managed well. I was very involved in the construction, the design and construction of the Jill Kerr Conway house on North Capitol by St. Philip's Church and I guess K Street. And it's a combination of housing for formerly homeless vets and 60% area median income families. And there's all kinds of supportive services that are provided on the ground floor, literacy training and financial literacy and substance abuse. And but what's really key is that the management entity that runs that, which is Common Ground, originally out of New York, is very experienced in affordable housing and in managing affordable housing projects well. And that's we need to be sure to get people like Common Ground who have that experience and have them be part of the design as well.
From the beginning.
From the beginning.
From the beginning. Yeah.
So here's another question from Tad Baldwin. What options are there for managing this completed space, i.e. options to them having the library or community center run things? So I guess it just gets right back to your point about management. So in the Deanwood, it's both, right? It's one building with both the library and the community center.
But DPR runs that facility and the library occupies a piece of it.
Right. Okay. So if we were to do it and it was in the same building or separate building, is it contingent upon where they sit? Like if they're separate buildings and they're run separately, but if they're in the same building, then they decide who's the agency that's going to run it. How does that work?
Good question. I don't really have there's probably a lot of different ways you could do it. I think one of the conversations you all might want to have is with the leaders of those agencies and put that to them and say, well, how would you run this? And if is there a private management company that manages the housing and things like that? Those are really important questions up front.
Yeah. So
I've had some conversations with the library, and they have pointed out that the library and DPR have some very different operating policies. You know, a good example is DPR insists that people show their ID to participate in programs, and the library believes very strongly they should be open to everybody and not require an ID. So things like that will need to get straightened out ahead of time so that everybody's operating on the same from the same page. But Tad's question is an interesting one. It seems like in terms of the public space, because of DPR's overall role, they would make sense as a manager. But because, you know, Stuart is right, the city is not known for its ability to bridge silos, or, you know, no bureaucracy is. That's what was Max Weber's claim to fame in the 19th century, is figuring that out about bureaucracy. So we may want to be sure, as we do the planning for the facility, that the city accepts some sort of a management advisory board from the ANC and Chevy Citizens Association or whomever members that would provide policy direction for things like what are the hours going to be, and how is it controlled, and you know, all the operating policies that will make the difference as to whether the project and the public space works well or not.
Okay, so here's a question for Matt. In a situation where the library and community center are programmed in one facility, what are the inherent advantages and disadvantages with the fusion of those two facility types?
Well, just instinctively, I think there's very significant advantages to having them programmed together. For example, typically, you know, more and more libraries have community meeting spaces in them, and community centers, of course, do too. So there would be a programming part that might see if you could combine the needs of the library community center with the community center meeting needs, so that you share that space, right? So that becomes a shared facility. There may be other things you could share in terms of storage space or entry vestibules or whatever it is that would allow you to build more of the program needs you want without duplicating program elements. So I think inherently there's a potential to be able to benefit from the fact that these two programs could share a lot of the facilities. And I would certainly, you know, in programming this project, I would certainly be looking to try and do that, you know, to see exactly how much. I mean, one of the reasons why we have meeting spaces in Cleveland Park, and so many of them, is because there's no real community center in Cleveland Park, and many of the meeting spaces are, you know, in the old library were used all the time because there was nothing the equivalent of what you have in Chevy Chase. So that would be something to look at right away, I think.
Okay, great.
I was very impressed.
And it could have budgetary implications too. Sorry.
I was very impressed when I was working with the library on Martin Luther King, but also Lockridge and Penn Branch and Anacostia and Woodridge, that there's been such a revolution in thinking in the whole library profession about, you know, that they face this sort of existential question of, well, people can read stuff online and they're buying more books. So what's our purpose as a library? And there's been increasing recognition on the part of the library profession of the importance of it being a civic space, having maker spaces, having opportunities for performances and book talks, and the rest of it has become more and more a role for them. So I think they're getting closer and closer to the role of Parks and Recreation or of community centers. So the opportunities for them to have a synergistic impact together, I think, are really strong.
Well, this is great. I mean, I'm so glad you brought that up, because Avalon Theater could not send someone to this to tonight's talk, and so they sent a statement. I just want to read it. It's in the chat. The Avalon Theater would like the redeveloped library community center to include film projection capable auditorium space where the Avalon could present programs of community interest. A prime usage of the space would be to facilitate the Avalon's programming expansion for film education programs for adults and kids. the auditorium could be as small as 25 seats or any larger capacity. So, you know, they're seeing more and more, I think, over the years that the theater itself is really reaching out to the community and to serve some of these interests. So it's not just for showing a film, but it's for education. It's for bringing people inside and to experience you know, their love of film and to understand that, and documentaries and so forth, a love of history, all of that, you know, comes to play. So I very much appreciate that statement, and I wanted to read it to you. Here's another question from Ron Eichner. There is a great opportunity to coordinate civic space at the Library Community Center with the wide sidewalks along the avenue, branding, landscaping, activities, etc. How might that be achieved?
I think Ron's right. I mean, I think one of the things that's nice about Connecticut Avenue is that the sidewalks are generous enough, you know, for a lot of different activities. When you think about, you know, the fact that sidewalk dining and other things along Connecticut Avenue have mushroomed in recent years because of the space of the sidewalk, it's very important. That spill out space of a building to a sidewalk is really important in terms of how it engages people. And, you know, lots of libraries have sidewalk sales and things like that. I would think that as part of the programming of any civic space, you would also include the sidewalk and how that gets used, and work with the public space committee, you know, work with, you know, the folks in the Office of Planning to design it so that it's part and parcel of the entire ensemble, from the landscape to the paving to how it gets programmed and used throughout the year. But it is a unique asset that I think could play a really major role in what public space is like.
And I think that there's a unique opportunity and challenge for that parcel because of the topographic changes. So right now, the berm is an obstacle. You don't feel as connected to, especially to the community center, because that's kind of off-putting. And so figuring out how to use that elevation difference in a way that could allow you to better relate to the sidewalk is I think a great opportunity. But the other challenge is when you look at the west side of Connecticut, there's so much activity on the sidewalks because of the land uses that are there. And then unfortunately, when you go to the east side of Connecticut, you've got the gas station, the Safeway, which is separated by a parking lot from a connection to the street. And you've got the community center and library, and then you've got the, you know, Wells Fargo with their surface parking lot. So it's one of the reasons why it's important that we're doing this as a small area plan and looking at the whole corridor, and hopefully encouraging that the redevelopment on the east side becomes more connected to Connecticut Avenue and the sidewalks and the street. And certainly having an anchor like what we're talking about with housing and the library and the community center will be a big help for getting some additional activity over on that side.
You know, one of the theories now in the design of public libraries is to make them like retail spaces, so that people, when they walk by them, feel encouraged to go in them. And so I think one of the great opportunities there is to, you know, for the community center and the library, is to make it so that, you know, they have an active engagement with the street in the same way a lot of the businesses on the west side of Connecticut Avenue have an active engagement. So people, you might even put a cafe in the ground floor there, you know, whatever, but anything that engages it makes people feel like, gee, you know, let's just pop in there and see what's going on. The librarians love that. The days of the stately Carnegie Library sitting in the middle of a big green patch in a public square somewhere are gone. They want the engagement. They want the immediacy. They want to, you know, be able to reach out and pull people into the facility and say, look at all the cool things that are going on here. And I think that's a real great potential.
That's really important. So Chevy Chase Community Center Ballet, I think the ballet program person asked the question, looking at the plot of land on which the current community center and library sit, it is not large enough to also include housing. What is the concept? where should the housing fit? And also, will it be for families who are at 30% or below of AMI or only 80%? So I've asked Ron Eichner to put the link to the Ward 3 Visions presentation where they have a little sketch of what's possible there. And this is not a plan that's set. This is just ideas, you know, how you might do it. So you could have two separate buildings for housing, and the bottom of the U, it could be the community center and the library. It could be something different. People I've talked to are like, no, don't do that. Put all the community center library up towards street side, put the housing closer to where the other single family homes are, you know, as a buffer. So these are not planned. We don't know. Please watch the last week's session. We talked a lot more about that, of what's possible, and the week before, the Community Land Trust. So I direct you over there. Tonight, it's just about the civic core. How do we create a public space? And so I want to say that. And the other question here is not about necessarily this civic core, but Robert Gordon earlier asked, how do you retain the old and the new along Connecticut Avenue? Can we save the storefronts and provide the opportunity to higher density behind or above it? So I think that's a fair question, and I think you could try to answer that.
Well, the Ward 3 Vision document that I think Ron put in the chat shows where at least a bunch of us who are part of Ward 3 Vision think new development could be introduced. And I think Ellen mentioned it earlier, the east side where the Wells Fargo is, and the Safeway, and obviously the community center library site and the gas station, and even the block that has Blue 44 and the fish market in it, seem like good candidates for that. I think we came to the conclusion that the fabric on the west side, with a few possible exceptions, was pretty much intact and ought to be kind of just, you know, enhanced. That there was, in my opinion, I'm not sure I would try and acquire those and tear them down or anything. A lot of that stuff works really well and has a lot of great character. And there are great buildings over there, like the arcade and, like, you know, Chevy Chase Liquors, which is kind of distinctive, you know, in its own little cute way. Sure. We said maybe the diner could be a place where there could be infill development, and maybe the CVS, and a little further north where the Long and Foster building is. But we pretty much felt the west side was, leaving it intact was probably a good move, and the majority of larger potential is on the east side of the street.
Although I personally would have absolutely no objection to losing Citibank and Goodyear Roll.
Oh yeah, no, we did identify those, all because Ellen wanted those out. But but we thought that those would be candidates that they might mirror with larger buildings, the apartment building that's on Chevy Chase Circle up by Blessed Sacrament, that scale would be a good scale in there. So I think what is really exciting about the potential for Chevy Chase DC is to retain the best aspects of historic Chevy Chase, of which there are many, and introduce new residents, new affordable housing, new market rate housing that could be very well integrated to the street frontage along Connecticut Avenue, in places in places where I think a lot of people probably, you know, look, the mechanic at the Exxon station is a very good mechanic. You know, I mean, he's done things for me. He's a nice guy and everything. On the other hand, you know, the community should decide whether or not, you know, in the long-term vision, whether that's an appropriate place for a gas station as well as a one-story drive-in bank at Wells Fargo. Those are real opportunities to bring new residents, new affordable housing into the neighborhood. And I think that would by its nature bring new customers to the retail that's there too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's an interest. I mean, this is one important question that the small area plan needs to address, and hopefully will emerge at the charrette and future sessions. But there are models, there are opportunities within the DC zoning code to create unique zones with unique provisions for particular specified geographic areas. And one example of that is down on the waterfront, where any proposal to build a building and within the Capital Gateway overlay, which is the area around the waterfront, has to be approved by the zoning commission. And there are articulated standards, design standards, for things like lower height and density along the waterfront, reduced bulk, bonus density for affordable housing, or so we have some tools that we can work with to keep the character of what we want in Chevy Chase, but also to encourage the redevelopment of underutilized space that could really strengthen the character of the community and help us bring in a more diverse residential base that we all are, I think almost all of us at least, would like to see.
So that leads to a question that Commissioner Zeldin, who's on a phone and having trouble putting it in the Q&A, he asks, what impact would a historic designation of the Connecticut Avenue corridor have on design options? I mean, you just expressed that the small area plan could have these unique zoning identifiers. So in terms of this question, what is your response?
Well, I'm now on the Historic Preservation Review Board in DC, and my view of that is that if it was designated a historic district, first thing would happen, the nomination would articulate what the special character features are of the neighborhood that make it eligible to be a historic district. If it were successful, those character definitions would be used to evaluate projects that would be proposed for the historic district as to how they would impact the character of the historic district. So, if there was a historic district along Connecticut Avenue, or larger case along the whole area there, the design would come to the Historic Preservation Review Board. It would be reviewed by the Office of Planning's preservation staff. They would make a recommendation, and the review board would vote on whether or not it was compatible in enhancing the historic district. It would, in my experience, I believe that the Historic Preservation Review Board plays a very large role in enhancing the design quality of the architecture in our city. When you have no controls by right development, the community, unless the developer is proposing to do a PUD or something that goes to the BZA or something like that, the community has very little input over what the design should be if it meets the zoning criteria. If there's another sort of thing like Ellen was suggesting, or if it becomes a historic district, there is a level of regulatory review of the design, which typically results in my opinion, the design being examined, discussed, and improved before it's and the community gets to weigh in through the ANC and gets to testify in front of the Historic Preservation Review Board. So I don't think that would slow down development. It would put a layer of review in there that would up the bar of the quality of the project, in my opinion.
Okay. So here's another, thank you for that, Matt. So Stuart asks, and actually I'm looking at the time and we're past, so I'm just one or two more questions and that's it. Stuart asks, we keep hearing about overcrowded schools and we want to invite more families into the new affordable housing. The Library Rec Center site used to be a public school. Can we integrate a public school function into shared spaces? Perhaps not a full pre-K through 5, but a feeder to Lafayette and Murch's 4th and 5th grades. Recreation and library and meeting rooms could be shared, for example, different times of day. You have different programmatic functions. Well, these are the kinds of questions like I think can be fed into the small area plan. But do you have any comment about that? Have you seen anything like that where there's that kind of use of shared space across the district?
Trying to think. I don't know. We did hear concern about schools and introducing new residents and the impact on the schools in terms of, what it would do and how the community might accommodate that. That is certainly something I would encourage community members to have discussions with the Office of Planning, because the small area plan should address that. As for your specific question about whether or not there are examples of, schools being part of these for a couple of grades, being part of community centers and things like that, I would say at this point, anything's possible. And if that's something people feel strongly about, they should have discussions about it and see if it's in the realm of the possible with DCPS.
Right. I think that's something that we should, I mean, I think all the transportation issues and all of that, that's another kind of area that we have to talk to the Office of Planning about through the small area plan. I think it is important. And they have assured us that they are talking to the other agencies about the impact of any kind of change. So if we do bring in more affordable uh, housing here, then obviously the population will increase and the needs and services, needs for services will increase and so forth. So we do have to consider that. I'm going to stop here, and I would like each of you, the panelists, thank you so much. But do you have was something not asked that you want to say? Anything you want to share with us? You've got the floor. It is yours, and then we will close this out.
Ladies
But
first.
when I close it out, don't leave right away. That's my thing. I would like you to stay on if you can. I will stop the recording though after that.
I think it's been a really good discussion, and the questions have raised a lot of important issues. I think that one thing that I think is really important, I don't see indications yet that DPR and DCPL are talking to each other and or engaged in a conversation about what the development is going to look like. And I plan on talking to Mary Che's office and asking for her to be sure that that there's a certain council pressure on them to begin that conversation, because it's going to, it's a complicated process. It takes a long time, to get community input. So if we don't start it soon, we're not going to see this project built in our lifetime. There's a lot of frustration that was voiced in the chat about all the work that went into the planning for the community center that then got put on hold. So I think it's really important that we urge those agencies and the Department of General Services and the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development to get their act together and talk to each other now, be active participants in the small area plan, so that when that plan is done, we've got a good set of marching orders to begin to go forward and get this project built.
I totally agree with, usually you agree with almost everything Ellen says, so that's just another instance of that. But however, the only thing I would add to is the following. I think you all are to be commended for the vision of including affordable housing as part of public assets like community center and the library. And I think Chevy Chase DC doing its part to address the housing crisis in our city is really, really super important. And I feel very strongly about that. And I think it's something that I greatly admire your leadership and the various commissioners to advocating for that, because I think it's something unique and something should be done. I do think, aside from all the encouragement of public officials, getting them to talk to each other, in these processes, what I've discovered, one important thing for people to realize is to participate, say what they think, but also realize that if you participate as an honest broker in a process to get this kind of project, you will get a lot of things you want. You may not get everything you want, but if you're honest about what you value, you will see, and you get a good design team, and you get a good builder and a good budget, and DPR and DC public libraries work together, as Ellen says, and that everybody will see something that they greatly value in the project. But it's really important to have that participation and understand that not everybody gets everything they want, not even the architect. But if you participate in an honest way and have a good team there, you will get something that is highly valued in a lot of different ways to the community.
Well, that's wonderful to end this session. We have to keep this in mind. And thank you so much, Ellen and Matt, for joining us tonight. And Commissioner Speck, Commissioner Zeldin, and Commissioner Gore for joining us, and all of the attendees who came tonight and for your questions and answers. Very much appreciated. This video recording hopefully will be processed by tomorrow. And then we will put it up on our website. I encourage you all to share it with others who you think should listen. There was a lot of good content, a lot of good food for thought, fire to spark our imagination. We need to get together and participate and make something that we want to see happen. So we have to make our needs known. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording, but you two don't go yet because I'm going to try to copy some of the Q&As and so forth. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.